You're listening to We Deepen Media.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Deepen with Christina. I'm your host, Christina Weber, founder and CEO of We Deepen and leader of the Love Club, a mastermind community for couples, singles, seekers who want to either deepen or attract an epic relationship that withstands the test of time. Today, you're listening in on a conversation with Rahi Chun. Rahi is a somatic therapist, a body worker, and a sexologist. He is a sex educator. And today, we are going to get into things that you probably have not heard before. So listen with an open mind. And if you do enjoy this podcast, please do like, subscribe, rate, give it 5 stars. It helps more people find it, helps us continue to host it. And go to WeDeepenLoveClub.com. Check out the club. If it's something that is calling to you, go ahead and join us. I welcome you. Tell us what you do for work.
Sure. So my work is called Somatic Sexual Wholeness. So I'm a certified somatic sex educator, sexological body worker, and also trained in a variety of nervous system re-regulating modalities. So in answer to your question, the work I do is repairing ruptures that occur sequentially in a client or in a human being's nervous system and sexual embodiment. So what that means is I first address the ruptures that occur during the developmental stage of a client, so during their childhood mostly, because I find that our adult sexual behaviors and patterns and desires really can get threaded back to our childhood influences. So we start there. And then we address ruptures that occur during our adolescence, which for most of my clients involve boundary ruptures. Like it's so common for people's like teenage years to be filled with, partying, not knowing how to assert their boundaries, this kind of a thing. So we repair that. And then with those foundations in place, we address whatever obstacles are preventing the client's full sexual embodiment. It could be anything from releasing genital armor, which is stored pain or numbness in the genitalia. It could be, repairing scar tissue from giving births and having vaginal tears or episiotomies that were never properly fixed. It could rewiring unhealthy associations with sexual desire. If clients were abused as children, they can only orgasm when their hair is pulled or by being humiliated, things of that sort. So it's kind of a wide range of issues, but the work is really addressing ruptures sequentially from childhood into adulthood, because I find that our adult issues can be threaded back to those very early developmental stages.
Do you find that there's a difference of men and women and how they're processing their emotions based upon the makeup of their body?
I do find huge differences between men and women. So most of my clients are female. The men that come to me tend to be gay men, because there's not a lot of heterosexual men who would come to a heterosexual guy for this kind of intimate touch. Um, but in general, the statistics are 1 in 6 men are survivors of some kind of sexual abuse or violation. But men aren't really as in touch with the vulnerable parts of their sexual psyche, I'll say. Like men don't commonly open up to other guys and talk about problems, or challenges or vulnerable issues, whereas women tend to and tend to do so openly. So I think there's a lot of education and support in men's sexuality that's missing, when you look at the statistics, 1 in 6. And I mean, we could get into it, but like, I think America's obsession with guns has to do with men's like not being in touch with their genitalia. They want bigger guns, they want more bullets, they want power. I think it all has to do with their disconnect with their sexuality. So yes, I think it's very, very different. I think, um, women, just because of the reproductive nature of your bodies, you have a sacred ritual of shedding the uterine lining once a month. There's just so much, whereas men, we piss in a urinal, but that's just, but that's it. Apart from sexuality, there isn't like this ritualistic connection and intimacy or an opportunity for it. And that's not to say all women have that either. I have so many clients who were shamed for their menstrual cycle and things of that sort. But I think women in general are much more connected to their bodies and to their emotions.
And your work is specifically around somatic release. You said touch. So straight men to come to a straight man to do that type of work. But I imagine that it's not all just touch.
No, no, there's a real understand like somatic psychological aspect to it. So, like, for example, I find that like as children, we all develop strategies to get attention and feel loved in the family, you know, whether it's being the people pleaser or the overachiever or the peacemaker. And that tends to be the obstacle in our adult sexual intimacy patterns, right? Like if you were the people pleaser, like let's say at 5, there was so much chaos in the home, you were the people pleaser. Well, and you've developed that strategy throughout your life. As an adult, that's not going to lead to you getting your sexual needs met if you're the people pleaser. So whatever the strategy was as a child becomes the obstacle. So in answer to your question, it's way more than just somatic work. It's really understanding the psychology of your sexual identity and how that's led to whatever armor or whatever issue is presenting in your body.
Can you give me an example of how you would work with, like, what a session would be like for a woman, and then what a session would be like for a man?
Sure. Well, the protocol is very similar, right? But the issues are different. So in answer to your question, we first start with the thorough intake, right? The intake is usually done via Zoom because I'm gauging. So it's 5 different areas we cover in the intake. I go back to wanting to know the circumstances under which the client was conceived, because we know now that the soup in which the fetus is gestating, like the fetus is absorbing all the emotions of the mother, but it's also feeling the emotions in the environment. And so I'm looking for patterns from that early stage on. And often it's uncanny, but when I ask clients, like, what's your first memory of your sexuality? There's often a thread of a pattern that can be linked back to people's first memory. Because the first memory isn't the first instance, but it's strong enough to make an impression, right? So, um, yeah. So, in answer to your question, the protocol is the same. We start with the intake. We focus on conception, relational dynamic with the mother figure, with the father figure, introduction to sexuality and sexual patterns. And then the first session, when the client comes in person, starts with really making the nervous system downregulated to a place of safety enough for the client to be able to receive touch. So I start with a modality called neuroaffective touch, where the client remains fully clothed. It's on a massage table. And then if and only if the client feels safe to move to the full body active consent, then the client disrobes. And now we're exploring the kinds and quality of touch that the client's body is wanting to receive. So everything is being directed by the body. And for people who've had boundary ruptures, which is most of us, it can be really um, like a reclamation process. Like nothing happens until the body's asking for it and the body really wants it. So the body's only receiving exactly what it wants. And during this period, we're also educating the client of their 11 erogenous zones, right? Back of the knees, the glutes, the hands, the feet, the lower belly, the upper thighs, the genitalia, the anal sphincter, the lips, the neck, the ears. So usually all clients learn something new about what their body likes. But this is important so that I have so many clients that say, my lover wants to please me. They ask me what I want, and I just don't know. So this is to not only empower the client's agency in knowing what their body likes, but knowing how to voice it and course correct it if they're not getting what they want. So this is universal, whatever gender, right? Because all clients learn from this. And then if and only if the client feels safe, we take these same principles to the pelvis and the genitalia, where the client learns about their erogenous anatomy from a felt sense, right? So they know what their anterior fornix feels like in conjunction with their perineal sponge stimulation, or their K-spot with their cervix, right? And they can give voice to what it is that they want to explore more. Or if it's a cock owner, then what is it like for the perineum to be massaged along with their frenulum, right? Or their coronal ridge along with their, external sphincter, right? So it's empowering. It's almost like giving you a real embodied sensorial manual to what your capacity is for your erogenous pleasure.
Hmm. Can we go back to conception? Uh,
Yes.
I once heard that the first trauma happens as the sperm and the egg meets, and when the sperm goes into the egg, the tail's cut off.
Mm, hmm,
And
hmm.
that's the first
Like trauma.
trauma. Yeah,
Yeah.
because you just lost your tail.
Yeah. Imagine that.
Uh, do you believe that to be true? Do you believe that that is something that is where
That
it starts?
that's a fascinating question. I don't remember having a tail, so I can't speak personally about my own experience. I could believe it, right? Because imagine, if you're that pulsating, vessel, yeah, that seems really traumatic. Now, along with that fact, I also have to kind of consider, like, there are other schools of thought that believe the soul actually enters the body, at what is it? I think 12 weeks, so I don't know, like, it is a trauma. I don't know uh if that traumatic memory affects the soul that enters the body when it does, you know
The soul enters the body 12 weeks after the baby has been conceived.
Yeah, it, specifically 120 days after conception is when at least the Sikh tradition celebrates, the soul entering the fetus's body. But there's so many different, like, philosophies and approaches to it. So in answer to your question, I could believe that, but there's so many other traumas that we don't really. I don't know. In some ways, I think it's a little barbaric, like the way. I mean, I think home births and midwives where the baby is first laid on the chest of the mother. I think that's like the natural way. But I think, like, fucking, can I cuss on this podcast?
You can cuss,
Okay,
fuck it
thank.
up.
I mean, holy shit. Putting feet in stirrups and having a woman on their back, that doesn't make any sense. It's like, just ergonomically, gravity-wise, it doesn't make any sense. So when you go back, I think there's so many traumas that happen from, I mean, just even planned C-sections is ridiculous. I mean, like, here's an infant that's been one with the whole universe, right? Since its conception. And then intruding hands dip in and pull it out when the doctor's ready. That just doesn't make any sense. So I think there's so many traumas. Maybe it's the tail getting cut off, but certainly, look, like, when you look at human nature, it's very wise. When you interrupt human nature out of some, like, egoic efficiency, it's going to wreak havoc onto the system. So things like, unnecessary C-sections, um, like rushing. I mean, I just think natural births are there's a reason. So, okay, so this happens. There's an oxytocin release during the birthing process, during a vaginal birthing process. Nature does this to bond the mother and the child. When there is something unusual or stressful that occurs during birth, it pairs with the oxytocin, right? And so it can create lifelong patterns in the child. So for example, if there's a lot of stress during the birthing, then the oxytocin gets paired with the stress, and that relationship between mother and child can be charged with that stress, because then the stress gets paired with the oxytocin. So there's an association between love and stress. So like there have been studies done on this where in Switzerland, they showed that people in their 20s that killed themselves by hanging themselves, there's like an uncanny correlation between umbilical issues and people who hang themselves, or people who gas themselves. Like during their birth, their mothers were sedated to a unusual degree. So like these correlations between the oxytocin and the birthing, right? And whatever significant other emotion or situation that occurs during that birth can create patterns into their life, which is why I start with conception.
Mm.
Um,
My significant other and I, we recently went to Sedona and did a couples retreat, a Sedona Soul Adventures couples retreat. This is where you meet with a practitioner at the organization. They have 70 practitioners of all types in the Sedona area. You visit their homes. And there was one a gentleman, Sequoia, that we met with, and he helps you identify what your core wounding is.
Whoa.
You go on a hike with him, and there's 26 core woundings that he has identified. And mine uh, came through as I'm on my own. My core
Mm,
wounding is I'm on my own.
mm,
And when I was born, my I was born very quickly. Like we
yeah.
got to the hospital. My dad was parking, let
Mm,
my mom off at the front door. By the time he walked into the room, they pretty much handed me to him.
wow.
And years late, not years ago, I went on an ayahuasca retreat, and a practitioner I worked with there was doing, chiropractic work, and he was seeing there's trauma in my back. He's like, it's masculine side. He starts going, was it brother? Was it father? Was it mother? His father. He's like age 0 to 1. Something happened 0 to 1. I come back from this retreat. I'm asking my dad, my mom, what happened
Yeah.
0 to 1. My mother says, I don't know anything happens, but your father did leave the hospital rather soon.
Mm,
She, I guess, had wanted him to stick around a little bit longer after I was born, and he left rather quickly. Now, do
yes.
those particular
Mm,
pieces play a role? Because for my mom to remember, 40 years later, that
totally.
she felt that my dad left the hospital soon.
Yeah,
And how did that then create this core wounding of them
exactly.
all on my own?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously babies are really sponges because they're just sensing everything. And so in your situation, like it's great that your father dropped your mom off. He came in. It sounds like they handed you to him. So, I don't know if I don't know what exactly transpired, but if you felt like that first bonding with another human being out of the womb was with your father holding you, and then he just takes off, you know yeah, I mean that's very, very conceivable to me.
Mm. And then you mentioned the umbilical cord wrapped around the neck.
Mhm.
I've also heard of the correlation between that and kink.
Absolutely, absolutely. So like in my field, sexological body work, there's something called the erotic blueprint, and it's got 5 blueprints, and kink is one of them. And, in the clients that I've had, I've just seen that can change, right? Because a lot of kink can come from traumatic incidences. And I think the umbilical cord is one. So again, like at birth, there's a big oxytocin release between mother and child. If that oxytocin is paired with some kind of strangulation sense, then that's going to feel like love to the child. And so as an adult, they can be seeking out that kind of kink or like really exploring it, right? Because I've had clients who I mean, this didn't happen at birth, but, like I had a client who, psychiatrist, successful, middle-aged guy, he could only have sex with complete strangers and being humiliated with leather. And when we did the intake, it turned out that he grew up as a gay boy in the Midwest. His father used to kick the shit out of him with his leather boots. So there's this pairing that happens. The only attention I get from the person I want attention from is being kicked, humiliated with leather. Now, as an adult, that's his erotic charge, being humiliated with leather.
Do you think that there's a because you're bringing these in, I've heard you say the word issue a few
Mm,
times, like these are issues.
mm,
Are these is the goal to heal out of these or to accept these and
mm.
own these?
Such a great question. Um, I think that's the choice of every human being. How do they want to explore? Uh, I mean, if it's not an issue to someone, it's not for anyone else to say it's an issue for them. You know, I mean, I think that's everyone's right. However, I will say that because my realm of work really has to do with genital de-armoring. So that's the release of um, unintegrated emotion or unconscious guarding in the genitalia that leads to pain or numbness. So what I will say is it's everyone to define what is an issue for them. However, a lot of these behaviors do lead to genital armor, that prevent people from having orgasms or extended full body orgasms, like if a guy is being, I mean, if he's being kicked or punished during sexual, a play, then the body is going to unconsciously guard itself, especially in the very sensitive areas. Like psychologically, he might get an erotic charge out of it, but I'm guessing that I mean, this client had a lot of numbness in and around his genitalia as a result of engaging in unhealthy and dangerous sexual interactions. So it might be a psychological high. He might not think of it as an issue, but it's going to cause armor to form in the genitalia, which, prevents him from really experiencing what he wants.
Hmm. How did you get into this work?
I know. Um, it's nothing you dream about as a kid, like wanting to go into. But yeah, as a kid, so, a little bit about my kind of like, I mean, I was a healthy vaginal birth, but my legs were mangled. So they were really crooked based on how I was positioned in my mom's womb. So this was in New York City. The doctors wanted to do surgery on my knees, but my mom was a nurse. So instead of surgery, she just lotioned and massaged my legs every night for 3 years until they just grew out straight. So touch like healed me. And I was always fascinated with the healing potential of touch. And then in college, I spent time in Japan. I lived in a homestay family in Japan and was drawn to the Zen meditation temples. And I was just really interested in this combination of like conscious touch and unconditional presence. And it seemed to just unravel armor and wounding in my girlfriend at the time. And so I wanted to learn everything I could about like, how is this actually happening? So I started studying Taoist practices, led me to studying tantric practices, got certified as a tantra teacher. And my training with Margot Anand was all about healing the pelvic floor of unconscious trauma or unconscious guarding from trauma. And I just saw miracles happen, like I remember my first residential, it was around 2000. I was paired up with a woman, a survivor of incest. She had pain and numbness, like her vulva, like we couldn't even go internal. And by the end of the week, there was so much sensation so much sensation she could enjoy. It's almost like reclaiming her vulva and vagina. And I was like, I want to learn everything I can about this, because it's like we didn't need fancy equipment. It wasn't in a hospital. I mean, it was just presence, clear intention, safety, sounding, breathing, and having the receiver having the courage to revisit sometimes really horrifying memories, to metabolize and discharge it from the body. And so, after finishing Margot's training, I just got trained in whatever ways I could. I went to Thailand, studied with Master Chia on like the Taoist approach to inner genital organ release, which is what they call it, Karsai Sang. Spent time in Europe studying different approaches of de-armoring the body, because the pelvis is very intimately connected to the throat, and the tension we hold in the throat area, as well as the heart, really. The throat, heart, and pelvis are like the three main areas where we hold armor, because if we've ever been threatened, or perceived, whether our sexuality or our well-being, these are the three areas that tend to armor up. So I have a curious mind. I just kind of studied.
And
And
how do people respond when you are out socializing and they ask you what you do?
oh, well, it's so interesting, Christina, because it's like 4 out of 5 people are like fascinated. They're like, you do what? Does this feel even exist? What do you touch their like, what happens, And they're just like open-eyed. And most people, don't fully understand their erogenous, genital anatomy, because nobody's taught this. So I talk about the K spot or the anterior fornix, and they're like, wait, what, where, how can I find my. 4 out of 5, 1 out of 5 will change the subject immediately. And I have found this amongst like relatives as well as friends. And usually it's an indication that there's some issue within their marriage or their relationship that they're just not ready to face or be reminded about.
Hmm.
Right.
Do you have, are you see, so I did recently have a
Yeah, you shared that.
yoni healing session with a female here in Austin, Texas, Rena Trevi. We're going to do a podcast on my experience with her, uh, uh, recording it next week. And I learned it was such a safe container. I learned so much from it. And she's actually uh, has a school, her and her mentor are certifying other women to be able to give other women this type of experience. However, realizing this is your work, realizing this is her work, I've been in the intimacy space for the past decade, and this is new to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
How are you seeing that? Do you have a lot of colleagues that are doing this? Are you seeing that this field is opening up and people are becoming more interested? And also, is working privately with a practitioner the only way to go about doing this work?
Um, okay. Yeah. So first of all, isn't it exciting that you're meeting people, who are professionally trained to hold safe spaces to really empower people with their erogenous potential? I think, I mean, it's so empowering, to not only know your erogenous capacity, but to be able to explore it, and be empowered by it, because our sexual center is our intuitive center, it's our creative center. There's just so much health and vitality and just well-being. It's like you become an integrated whole person. So in answer to your question, there's a professional field called sexological body workers, and the state of California approved the training in 2003. So there's an actual professional field of certified sexological body workers, 21 years now. It's still in its infancy, but from that first one that happened in San Francisco, there are now 7 in the world, one in the UK, Australia, Berlin, where I taught, in Brazil. So there's 7 of them kind of churning out these certified sexological body workers now. So yes, the field is growing. Now, in addition to the field of sexological body work, there are people like Renee who are trained, who are very sensitive, and there are other tantric schools and other lineages that are offering this work. So yeah, it's great that it's flourishing and people are offering trainings and so forth and so on. So in answer to your second question, in addition to coming for one-on-one sessions, yeah, people can learn. Like I have an online course called The Three Keys to Genital De-Armoring, for example, where people, there are video demos of me demoing different de-armoring practices on a vulva, on a penis, cervical de-armoring. So there's like ways to learn this online. It's different, of course, than having a professional hold space for you, understanding your psychosomatic history, any histories of violations, because armor is really unintegrated emotions that were the emotions were too overwhelming at the time of the trauma to really process. And so it's kind of reminding the body owner, hey, there's some unfinished business here to integrate and metabolize. And having a professional space holder who's trained in a trauma-informed way will be very different than kind of going about it on your own. But there is that option. There are, online courses. I have colleagues in Europe that offer kind of guided self-de-armoring, which I have in my course as well. So there are different ways of learning and experiencing that work.
Mm. This is also fascinating.
Yeah,
It's,
yeah.
my significant other and I, after Rena Trevi is who I did my session with, we've actually booked another session for him and I
So
to
good.
do it together. And she's going to teach him
Yes.
about me through the process so he can do
So
this for me
yeah. So
separately.
imagine like the terrains of intimate connection, you know, the terrains of intimate connection and lovemaking. It's like it's like unlimited once you start to share this with your partner, right? So I'm a big advocate of one-way touch. And I've had couples who've been married for like 30 years. They've never explored one-way touch. So, like usually when we're dating someone, things get hot and heavy. We're kind of both going at it. But one-way touch is so important because the receiver has no responsibility other than being present with their sensations, right? And the giver has no, like they're not being touched, they're just giving. And a couple, clients who are couples learn like so much about each other with one-way touch. But when you bring that to the genital de-armoring and genital mapping, so genital mapping is just a process to understand the erogenous map of your genitalia. You learn so much about each other's pleasure, uh, shyness, maybe fears, reluctance. Um, you just learn so, and you also learn like how difficult or easy it is for your partner to ask for what they want, which is a whole other thing, because I think there are a lot of people pleasers in our society, who don't, when you're encouraged to really ask for what you want and then asked again, is this what you really want? Or can something make this even better? It challenges the receiver to really go for it all, And once you get into the practice of really asking, really attuning for what your body wants, asking for it and reveling and receiving it, it takes your kind of radiant lovemaking to a different level. So, like a colleague, Ariel and I are planning on offering, like last year, we offered this for couples. And, one, couples learned that, oh, wow, we thought we needed to learn sexual techniques, but what we really yearned for was intimate connection.
Mm.
Right? That's a huge takeaway. Like people think, oh, I'm really wanting, I don't have enough sexual skills, but what they're really yearning for is intimacy, just
Mhm.
that connection. So that's a big takeaway. But then the other thing is they learn so much, the things they thought their partner liked, they discover things that they really like, you know. Um, and then, much less being able to edge your partner, to greater and greater terrains of erotic pleasure. So the one-way touch is really important, and couples learning about each other's body and for how to please each other's body through that is a real, real huge thing for couples.
I
So
really
that,
appreciate the one-way touch and
oh,
the focusing on, one at a time, because oftentimes it's like this tit for tat.
yeah,
And
yeah,
uh, I know some women who, have a hard time surrendering to that, and they want to make sure their partner is pleased, or they feel the pressure of a man saying, I want to see orgasm. I want to see orgasm. And so there was some place to get to. When you talk about genitals, uh, initially, we're thinking of yoni, lingam. What about anal?
Oh man. I mean, like I'll say this. I think that's like one of the biggest discoveries that clients experience in sessions, whatever gender, because I have a lot of female clients that, they've been curious, but they feel like it's unladylike, the smell and this and that. And, guys have their own issues around that, even though like most men need anal de-armoring, right? Because like most men's issues around being a provider, providing safety, it's all root chakra issues, and then most men, like I think prostate cancer is the number 2 killer for men. And most men have never had their prostates massaged. And so it's such an easy thing to do, but they have to get over the whole stigma around exploring their anal sphincter. Now, I say this to men. I'm like, look, the pelvic is full of incredible nerves and nerve endings that lead to sensations of pleasure, orgasmic pleasure, right? Women, vulva owners, have an orifice in the front of their bodies to explore all of those intrapelvic nerves. Guys only have one orifice on the backside. If you're not exploring your intrapelvic nerves, you're keeping yourself from having a healthy pelvis, right? Because our genitalia is on the outside, and so, and then, with vulva owners, um, I say the same thing. It's like you are exploring half of your pelvic capacity for pleasure and sensation if you're just limiting yourself to, intravaginal exploration, and overlooking all of the sensation that's available intraanally.
So how's, doing this work? You mentioned that when you started to get into this field that you were in a relationship, and she
Yes.
was one of the catalysts that opened you up to go on this exploration. What's your love life now like,
Right.
as also being a practitioner that supports people
Right.
so intimately?
Yeah. Okay, so we're getting personal now. This is great. So, a couple of things. Um, like what happens in a session is is not intimacy. I mean, it's intimacy in a way, but it's very different from having a lover, right? I mean, when a client is on a table, I understand, having done the intake, I'm very aware of, whether, their babysitter violated them at age 5, or a teenager like did something at 13. So it's really like, obviously there's a client practitioner dynamic going on. Um, so what is my love life like? So I will say, um, I it's fantastic in that, um, I love intimacy, and for my profession, there's a lot of touch involved, right? So I'm very attuned to touch, and it provides sets of skills that are, different than the skills that an accountant or a lawyer gets from doing their job. Having said that, when I go to a party, like a dinner party, or like, like I'm going to a cacao event this weekend, I may hit it off with someone. And then when they ask me what I do, 4 out of 5 times, they will want to know something about how to address their sexual issue, right? Because everyone has some sort of issue. Most people, I would say. And at that juncture, I usually have to decide, like, feel into, okay, is this person meant to be someone I date, or are they meant to be someone on my table as a client, right? And more times than not, they're meant to be a client, because it doesn't like, as you know, like, as all, like, you don't want to be dating, it's like, you want a balanced relationship in a partnership, and not you don't want to feel like you're your lover's coach or their practitioner. And so I usually have to like feel into like what the truth of this dynamic is meant to be. There's that issue. And then there's another issue where I've had, you know, girlfriends who aren't comfortable with, when I have clients who are inorgasmic, they come because they want to experience an orgasm, And so some women are more comfortable with that because they understand that it's really healing, and others don't feel comfortable with that. So I
Mm.
would say it takes like someone who's very open-minded and very sex positive to feel comfortable like being in partnership with someone who does the kind of work that I do.
Yeah, yeah, I imagine. It's almost like you would have to be in relationship with somebody who is in the field of intimacy in some way, shape, or form. It's probably a really good match. And also, it doesn't have to be, but I think someone who's really curious about that.
Yeah.
For me personally, I know that when I'm dating, that I have to like their job and I
Yes.
have to be interested in their job and want to support who they are in the world.
Hmm. Yeah, because, I mean, hopefully their job is their purpose and it really reflects who they are and, what they want to contribute to the world. So that's a huge part of them for sure.
And what are you when you do date, what are you what are you interested in?
Um, Honestly, well, there are a couple of things, right? Like knowing the work that I do, I'm really attracted to people. I mean, this is going to sound really clinical, but I'm just naming it because I had this conversation with a friend last night who felt the same way. Um, it's really like nervous systems it's like I need someone whose nervous system really aligns with mine, right? So, it's like because I'm really about presence and connection and be breathing together, and so like I need someone who's really present, and that speaks to someone's nervous system. Beyond that, obviously, I want someone who loves herself, takes care of themselves, who's generous, a great listener, who loves adventure and is really passionate about, I think because I'm so much of service, that usually blends well because in any kind of conversation, our mindset goes to, well, what's best for this person, so I think someone who has like of a service, who's generous and has a heart of service tends to align well. And then Christina, there's that kind of undefinable quality where it's just a joy to be with someone, you know like the partners I've had where we're just holding hands, walking, and like nothing needs to be said. Like we don't even have to do anything. It's just a joy to be with them. And that's kind of that like, a little undescribable. But I tend to go for I tend to get drawn to kind of quirky, unusual women.
Mm.
Like kind of unicorns in a way.
You're in the Los Angeles area, and I see that, and I've hosted conversations with many play party
Yeah.
hosts.
Yeah.
So there's lots of play parties in Los Angeles and Austin, Texas, Miami, New York. And these play parties are conscious, some conscious, not all conscious, but exploration of eroticism. There is this quote that has always stuck with me from Lisa Marie Patterson, I believe is her name. And it's this image of two bodies um, laying on top of each other and their chakras and them being in alignment.
Mm.
And in it, the text around that image says something like that, be careful. It says, don't sleep with somebody who you wouldn't want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Because once we intertwine sexual energy in that way, we become enmeshed with that person. I'm curious about, from your lens, how you view sexual energy and then the play party scene,
Yeah.
as in there's this
Mhm.
openness to explore ourselves erotically.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's a really fascinating question. So, I remember in my Kundalini yoga teacher training, Guru Meher said that there is I mean, because Kundalini is very much about energy and energy bodies. According to the Kundalini tradition, we have 10 bodies, our auric body, our energetic body. It's very kind of energy sensitive. And the belief that we heard in our teacher training is that it's 7 years that we carry our partner's energy, from lovemaking. So that's, you are taking on the energy of your lover. Um, and then they went on to say that if you have a simultaneous orgasm, you will take on their energy for the rest of your life. That's how powerful a simultaneous orgasm is. And that's something I'm sure everyone wants to, enjoys experiencing. So, yes. Um, yeah, I mean, it's something not to take lightly. And at the same time, the way I've understood taking on sexual energy is from the act of genital intercourse. So, I've been to play parties where people are having genital intercourse, but most of the play parties I've been to, uh, there's like a separate room for if you want to go there, but it's a lot of like first, second, third base intimacy. And I haven't heard anything that made sense to me about how much energy like gets mixed and exchanged, like from oral sex, for example, you know? So, um, I am a real advocate of honoring your body, expressing your sexual energy, and exploring, to get a sense mostly of what it is that your body likes and doesn't like. And that takes a lot of, a play party can be a great environment to explore that, right? Because, the play parties I've been to, there are boundaries, explicit, there's really consent around it, which makes it safe, which is very, very important. Um, and if it goes to a place where your body feels really intuitively drawn to have sexual genital fluid exchange or energetic exchange, you have to understand that, okay, I'm I'm choosing to take on the energy of this person. So to really know what energy that is, I would say is a very wise thing.
And if two people are then intimate with one another and say they have that penetrative sexual experience, is do you promote a process of clearing, of sexual energy clearing or karma clearing, specifically around if you're sleeping with somebody who's sleeping with multiple people, or
Yeah.
you haven't created those agreements for exclusivity in any way? And even if two people do enter a relationship, do you think that's important that they discuss this, and and what mind framing do they
Mm,
bring into that conversation?
sure. So I think so if two people are exchanging energy sexually with genital penetration and one or both the partners have other partners, right? Then I do think it's super important to lay it all out, so that you're all on the up and up about emotion, like what's going on, how available the people are and what the intention of this is. It could just be having a weekend adventure, which is great. But at least know, okay, I'm taking on the energy of this person, which I'm really cool with. And what is the energy container that you're going to be taking on? If they're having multiple lovers, then what's the quality of that energy that's in them that you're then inviting into your body. I mean, I think that's just wise self-care.
I once heard a man give advice to another man, and he said, never sleep with a woman that you're not willing to take care of for the rest of her life.
Yeah, I think that's good advice if uh well, yeah, I think it's good advice, particularly if, they're of a child rearing age, because that's a reality, you know. If they're not of a child rearing age, maybe it'll be a different consideration for some men.
And then chords. Let's talk about chords because that's you know, in the conscious community, we've heard chords and cord cutting uh,
Oh, yeah.
often, but I don't think everybody listening to this podcast, you might be
Hmm.
not familiar with what the term chords means.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There are people who can actually see chords, which trips me out. I mean, it's almost like having sunglasses where, you can see what other people can't see. But yeah, I mean, like after Margot's week-long residential, we would go through a cord cutting process. And that's even because even though we don't, there's no genital penetration in her trainings, but there is a lot of like hands on genitals and hands in genitalia, to learn the de-armoring process. And I feel like a lot of it is having the intention and having the agreement with another person to cut the cords. And she leads us through a process where, like, if you and I were cutting cords, we would share the intention, almost creating like a ritual around the cord cutting ceremony, and then go through each chakra, right? And make kind of a blade with our hands. And like first, if we're gonna cut our root chakra from each other, we would just at the same time. And then I would say, I'm taking back my cords into my body. And I would see that happening, visualize that, and I give you back your cords and see your cords go back into your root chakra. And we do that with all the cords. So that's kind of her, what she taught us. Other people, they bathe with Epsom salt. They have like I have like after every session, I mean, before I give a session, I have my kind of ritual where I call in the spirit guides and ancestral lineage of my client for support, and then after every session, I have my own cord cutting ceremony where I use Epsom salt and 91% rubbing alcohol to clear the space. But then I also cut cords in the shower as I'm, releasing the energy. But yeah, cords, I mean, especially if you're, I think even if you're exchanging sexual intimacy that doesn't involve penetrative intercourse, we're taking on energy all the time, and I think if you're exchanging bodily, if you're having penetrative intercourse, you could easily, especially if you're an empath, you can be feeling emotions that aren't really yours, you know, and um and not really aware of it.
Hmm. Do you think what would you say are the benefits of having chords? Say you're in a relationship that two people are agreed to be, they're excited to be,
Yeah.
they're growing together. What are the benefits of having those chords with each other?
That's a great question, Christina. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I would think if you're really aligned, you wouldn't need the chords there. I don't know. I don't know if there are benefits. I mean, part of me is wondering, well, aren't you more attuned to each other? Aren't you feeling each other's feelings more? Maybe, but I think the honest answer is I don't know.
Because you could say that, aren't you more in tune with each other? Aren't you more feeling? But I think sometimes in relationship, we can make that mistake too and not ask the questions and think that we know what the other person is thinking. And then that suppresses a level of deeper relating because we
Yes.
think we know.
That's so true. That's so true. That assumption can be jumping the gun or assuming too much. And, I would like to think that you don't need to be courted with someone in order to have the best relationship ever. I think you can be two independent beings being interdependent and very aligned, and not necessarily have like these um like attachments, because you're free at choice, and you're choosing each other, and you're choosing everything you're sharing with each other.
Richard Rudd from Gene Keys,
Hmm.
he was on a podcast and I heard him tell a story of a man. They were, it was a very conscious group of people. And one of the men spoke out and he said, I don't understand this concept of being completely unattached because my wife and my children, I would do anything for them. And it just boggled. How do I consider not being attached to a life and existence with these people that I love
Hmm.
most? This makes no sense to me.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I get that. I guess the distinction I'm making is like there's a choice, and there's a like I don't know if we're using the word attachment in the same way, but or if I'm using the same way that he's meaning it. But there's, like there are couples who are attached who feel like they're less than whole without each other, and then there's a choice like this. Of course, like I love, I don't have kids, but I love my mom, my sister, my cousins, but that's a choice. I don't feel like, you know, it's not an obligation, and it's not an emotional obligation. It's a choice.
There's a documentary film, I believe it's called Keepers of the Light. And this woman goes, on her journey, sort of like the eat, pray, love
Mm,
style. And she comes across a village in Peru. And there's a clip where a man is, a Peruvian man is speaking about a tradition that they have in their culture where when a woman starts to be 13, they teach her that when she meets a man, to be who she likes, who she thinks may become her husband, to be very gentle with herself, to be very slow. And they tell her it's because that it's not that like that he will grow from your shoulder. They teach her that he will either leave you for another woman or he will die. And they teach this to women at 13 so that they start to learn this idea of unattachment.
mhm.
So he will either leave you for another woman or he will die.
Wow. I think there's wisdom to that. I think there's wisdom to slowing down, you know, and there's wisdom to, yeah. I mean, that's really, I love the wisdom because it's empowering the 13-year-old young woman uh, to kind of be in the place of choice, and know that like she's really of value.
Rahi, this was such a great conversation with you. Thank you for being patient to get to this moment to record the podcast. And thank you
Mm.
for being a witness to the development of We Deepen and reflecting back to me what you see. It's been super helpful to hear your words. So you've been coming into this podcast before we started recording. You're like, that empire that you've created, what's it like being you?
Yeah.
And I'm grateful to have you on this journey, and I'm grateful for the work that you're doing in the world.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm so impressed with how, I mean, I feel like I've seen We Deepen when it was like, like just like a high school rock band, and now it's like touring the world, It's like I knew it back then. So yeah, I think the work you're doing is amazing, and I'm just excited to see it evolve and continue to grow. And I've super enjoyed this conversation with you, Christina. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for doing the work that you're doing because we're gonna keep working together. This is
Mm,
we're still at the infancy, we're still at the beginning of
yes.
it. And I'm collecting people like you to support others in having epic, healthy, loving relationships. If somebody's interested right now in working with you, What can they do?
Well, my website, they can come to my website, which is somaticsexualwholeness.com. Somaticsexualwholeness.com. There's info about how to reach me, about my online course, retreats. Yeah, I'm really interested in supporting couples right now, and also in how very specifically dosed psychedelics can support expansion of embodiment and sexual pleasure. And so these are kind of the things I'm exploring right now. But they can go to my site.
We'll include that in the description below. And if you make your way to Austin from Los Angeles, I would love to do a couple session with you and my significant other.
Awesome. I would love that so much. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Rahi. And thank you, everybody, for listening to another episode of Deepen with Christina. If you do enjoy this podcast, please do like, subscribe, rate, give it 5 stars. Helps more people find it and also helps to introduce more people to what we're up to at We Deepen. Go to the website, wedeepen.com. Check out the Love Club. Check out the events we're curating for you. And until next time, I love you. Bye.